Crystal chandeliers bathed the sterling grand in golden light, casting dancing shadows across marble floors polished to mirror perfection. Tables draped in silk gleamed with silverware so bright it could blind, each piece positioned with military precision. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater where the wealthy performed their greatest act. The illusion that money could buy respect. The air that night buzzed with excitement and expensive cologne. A delegation of Middle Eastern investors had arrived, their presence promising new billion-dollar contracts that would reshape skylines and stock markets. Whispered conversations in multiple languages floated between tables, each word carrying the weight of empires. At the center of it all lounged Karim al-Mosri, a billionaire oil magnate whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. His custom-tailored suit fit like liquid silk. His diamond-encrusted watch caught the light with every gesture, and his presence commanded attention from every corner of the room. Guests laughed at his every word, though most barely understood the depths of his arrogance or the cruelty that lived behind his polished smile. Karim was the kind of man who measured worth in zeros on bank statements, who believed that money was the ultimate language of power. Tonight, surrounded by investors worth billions, he felt invincible, a king holding court in his golden palace. Moving quietly through this glittering world was Layla Carter, balancing trays of crystal wine glasses with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to become invisible. Her black uniform was plain and practical, her shoes slightly worn from countless hours on marble floors. But her posture remained graceful despite the weight of exhaustion she carried daily. She had worked at Sterling Grand for 8 months, learning the unspoken rules of survival in a world that saw her as nothing more than furniture with legs. Smile politely, bow when spoken to, swallow insults like bitter medicine. Keep your head down, your voice quiet, your dreams locked away in the space between your ribs and your heart. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something electric charged the air, and Layla sensed that her carefully constructed invisibility was about to shatter. As Layla approached Karim's table with a tray of champagne glasses, worth more than her monthly salary, she felt his eyes on her, not kind, not curious, but assessing, like she was a piece of furniture he was considering purchasing. The weight of his gaze made her skin crawl, but she maintained her professional composure, years of practice keeping her expression neutral. Karim leaned toward his guests, his voice dropping to what he assumed was a private whisper. But in his arrogance, he spoke loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. In Arabic, his voice dripping with contempt, he muttered. The men around him chuckled behind their glasses, hiding smirks that revealed their complicity in his cruelty. Karim's smile widened, assuming that the waitress, like all the other staff, hadn't understood a single word of his linguistic poison. Lala's hand tightened around the silver tray until her knuckles went white. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. She had heard such words before in English, whispered in kitchen corners, hissed under breath by people who thought their prejudice was invisible. But this was different. This was personal. This was a direct assault on her dignity, spoken in a language Karim believed would shield him from consequences. What Karim al-Mosri didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Layla Carter understood every single word, every syllable, every shade of meaning and contempt. She set the glasses down with trembling hands, each clink against the marble table echoing like thunder in her ears. Then she straightened, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Her eyes locked on Kareem's with a calmness that belied the storm raging inside her chest. And then, in flawless Arabic that cut through the background music like a blade through silk, she spoke. With all due respect, sir, dignity is not measured by wealth, but by how you treat others. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The room froze as if time itself had stopped breathing. Forks hovered mid-air, conversations died mid-sentence, and every eye turned toward the waitress, who had just shattered the carefully constructed hierarchy of power with a single sentence. Kareem's smirk faltered and cracked like ice under pressure. His champagne glass clinked against the table as he set it down to hard, the sound sharp and final. Layla's voice didn't waver as she continued, each word precise as a surgeon's scalpel. You may own oil fields and towers that scrape the sky, but if you cannot respect those who serve you with dignity, then your wealth is worth less than the crumbs scattered on this floor. The silence that followed was thunderous, pregnant with shock and possibility. In that moment, the invisible waitress had become the most visible person in the room, and the mighty billionaire sat speechless, stripped bare by truth spoken in his own language. Kareem al-Mosri was accustomed to being called many things: the desert lion, the oil king, the master of markets, but he had never been called speechless. Yet here he sat, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth, while a waitress in a plain black uniform commanded the attention of every powerful person in the room. The silence stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap. Finally, one of the Arab investors, a distinguished man with silver threading through his beard, murmured in awe, her language is perfect. Another leaned forward, genuine curiosity replacing the earlier sycophantic attention they had showered on Kareem. Who is she? These weren't casual observations. These were men who had grown up speaking Arabic, who could distinguish between textbook learning and native fluency, between memorized phrases and genuine understanding. And what they heard in Layla's voice was not just accuracy, it was poetry. Kareem's face burned with humiliation. For the first time in decades, he had no clever retort, no cutting remark to regain control. The woman he had dismissed as livestock had just revealed herself to be a scholar, and worse, she had exposed his cruelty to the very people whose respect he desperately needed. He stammered in English, his usual commanding presence reduced to stuttering confusion. This is inappropriate. She's out of line. But his protest sounded weak, defensive, desperate. The damage was done, spread across the room like wine spilled on white silk, impossible to ignore, impossible to clean. Around the room, other conversations had stopped entirely. Waiters stood frozen with trays balanced on their hands. Guests turned in their chairs to stare, and even the piano player's fingers stumbled over the keys before falling silent entirely. Layla stood perfectly still, her heart hammering but her expression serene. She had just crossed a line from which there was no return. had stepped out of the shadows of invisibility into the harsh spotlight of consequence. But for the first time in her adult life, she felt completely authentic herself. She had found her voice, and it was beautiful. The aftermath of Layla's response rippled through the sterling grand like an earthquake through crystal. As the evening wound down and guests departed in hushed groups, whispered conversations followed in her wake. Some looked at her with new respect, others with curiosity, and a few with the kind of fear reserved for things that upset the natural order of power. In the staff break room, her co-workers surrounded her with expressions ranging from awe to terror. "Girl, did you just speak Arabic to Karim al-Mosri?" whispered Maria, one of the other waitresses, her eyes wide as saucers. "Are you completely insane?" hissed James, a senior waiter. "Do you want to get fired? Do you want to get all of us fired?" "I couldn't help it," Lala said quietly, sinking into a plastic chair that had seen better decades. The words just came out. "I couldn't keep pretending I didn't understand." "But how do you even know Arabic?" Maria pressed, genuine curiosity overriding her fear. Lala looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly from adrenaline. "I've been studying it for years, since I was 12. It's complicated." An older dishwasher named Omar, who had emigrated from Syria 5 years earlier, approached quietly. He had been washing dishes in the kitchen when word of the incident reached the back of the house. But the story had spread like wildfire through the immigrant staff. In accented English, he said, "Miss Layla, what you did tonight, it was brave. You spoke for all of us who understand what it feels like to be treated like animals." He pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand and walked away without another word. When Layla unfolded it later, she found a message written in beautiful Arabic calligraphy. "Thank you for giving us dignity. Stay strong, asterisk." To understand how Layla Carter came to speak perfect Arabic in a moment that would change her life forever, one must travel back in time to a small, cramped apartment on the south side of the city where dreams lived alongside cockroaches and leaky faucets, years before chandeliers and silk tablecloths entered her world. Layla's universe consisted of 3 people: her father David, her younger brother Malik, and herself. Their apartment was a study in making dew paint peeling like old sunburns, a heater that rattled like chains, and rain that found its way through the ceiling during storms. But within those imperfect walls lived something more valuable than marble and gold, a family bound by love and unshakable determination. David Carter worked as a taxi driver, his hands permanently stained with calluses from gripping the steering wheel. Through 16-hour shifts, his eyes carried the weariness of a man who had seen too much of life's harsh edges. But his voice always softened when he spoke to his children, especially his daughter. "Baby girl," he would tell Lala as she helped him count the day's earnings at their scratched kitchen table. "Education is your skeleton key. Learn everything you can, and no door will stay locked forever." It was during one of those late-night rides that Layla's linguistic journey began. She was 12 years old, sitting in the back seat of her father's taxi while he drove to Arab tourists. From the airport to their hotel, she listened, fascinated. as they spoke rapidly in a language that sounded like music to her untrained ears, all flowing syllables and exotic rhythms. Their voices rose and fell with emotion. Their hands gestured expressively, and Layla found herself completely captivated by the beauty of sounds she couldn't understand. When they reached their destination and the passengers departed with generous tips and warm handshakes, Layla leaned forward between the front seats. "Baba, what were they talking about?" David chuckled, exhaustion temporarily lifting from his shoulders. They were arguing about whether the hotel would have real shawarma or the fake American version. "It sounded so beautiful," Layla said dreamily, "like singing, but with words." Her father's expression grew thoughtful as he pulled away from the hotel's circular drive. "You know what, baby girl? If you want to understand people really understand them, you need to learn their words. That's how you see into their hearts." Those words embedded themselves in Layla's soul like seeds in fertile soil. From that pivotal night forward, Layla embarked on a secret education that would span nearly a decade. She haunted the public library's dusty foreign language section, checking out Arabic grammar books with covers so worn the titles were barely visible. She filled notebooks with vocabulary words, conjugation tables, and pronunciation guides, taping them to her bedroom walls until they looked like scholarly wallpaper. Her father would find her late at night, whispering words to herself by the light of a desk lamp held together with electrical tape. "Saba al-Kaya," she would murmur. "Good morning. Shukran. Thank you. Kaif holok. How are you?" Asterisk instead of scolding her for staying up past bedtime. David would smile and kiss the top of her head. "That's my brilliant girl. Keep learning." By age 14, Layla could hold basic conversations with the Arab shopkeepers in their neighborhood. By 16, she was translating simple documents for immigrant families who trusted the quiet, serious girl who never asked for payment, but always accepted their grateful hugs and homemade meals. Her fluency grew not just from textbooks, but from immersion. She watched Arabic news channels, listened to Lebanese music, and read poetry that made her cry even when she didn't fully understand why the words were so beautiful. Mrs. Nura, their elderly Egyptian neighbor, who had been a literature professor in Cairo before immigrating to America, noticed Layla's passion and took her under her wing. Every Thursday evening, Layla would cross the narrow hallway to Mrs. Nura's apartment, where they would drink mint tea and discuss everything from classical Arabic poetry to modern political events in the Middle East. "You have a gift, Habibi," Mrs. Nura would tell her, using the Arabic term of endearment that made Layla's heart swell with pride. "Most people learn languages with their minds. You learn with your soul." Under Mrs. Nura's guidance, Layla's accent perfected, her vocabulary expanded, and her understanding deepened beyond mere words into the cultural context that gave those words their power. But life has a way of reshaping dreams without asking permission first. When Layla was 17, her mother lost her battle with cancer after a long, expensive fight that drained their savings and left the family emotionally and financially devastated. Suddenly, Layla wasn't just a daughter and student. She became the family's backbone, responsible for cooking, cleaning, managing bills, and helping Malik with his homework while her father worked double shifts. To keep their heads above water. The acceptance letter to the state universities. Linguistics program arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, along with notification of a partial scholarship that would cover tuition, but nothing else. Layla held that letter for hours, reading it over and over until the words blurred through her tears. "I'm so proud of you, baby girl," her father said that evening, holding her while she cried into his shoulder. "But I know you can't go. Not yet. Not while we need you here. What if this is my only chance?" Lala whispered. "Education isn't a place," David replied firmly. "It's what you carry in your head and your heart. You'll keep learning, just in a different classroom." So Layla folded up her dreams, tucked them away like precious photographs, and went to work. First at a grocery store, then at a cafe, finally landing the job at Sterling Grand, where she could blend into the background, while observing a world of power and privilege from the outside. But she never stopped studying Arabic. Late at night, after Malik had finished his homework and her father had collapsed into exhausted sleep, she would pull out her books and notebooks, continuing her education by lamplight. She read Arabic newspapers online, practiced calligraphy until her fingers cramped, and listened to podcasts from Al Jazeera until the rhythms of formal Arabic became as natural to her as breathing. Malik, now 14 and fiercely protective of his sister, would sometimes find her asleep at the kitchen table, her head pillowed on an open Arabic textbook. "Didi," he would whisper, using the Urdu term for elder sister that some of their Pakistani neighbors had taught him. "You should be in college, not serving rich people their food." Someday, Lala would mumble, half asleep. "When you're older, when we're more stable, someday." While Lala Carter was building her secret palace of knowledge in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, Kareem al-Mosri was constructing an empire that spanned continents and commanded headlines. Born into privilege as the son of a Saudi oil executive, Kareem had transformed his father's substantial fortune into something legendary. His business empire included oil refineries across 3 continents, luxury resort chains that catered to royalty and celebrities, shipping companies that moved goods across every major ocean, and real estate developments that transformed skylines from Dubai to Manhattan. Financial magazines called him the desert lion, but those who worked under his command knew he preferred claws to wisdom. Kareem had built his reputation on being untouchable, unpredictable, and utterly ruthless. He crushed competitors with the efficiency of a machine and the coldness of winter wind. Board meetings became battlefields where he emerged victorious not through collaboration but through domination. But his greatest weapon wasn't business acumen or inherited wealth. It was his ability to make others feel small. Kareem had perfected the art of humiliation, using language, culture, and economic power to reduce even successful people to shadows of themselves. He delighted in speaking Arabic in front of English speakers, assuming his linguistic superiority gave him automatic dominance in any room. His penthouse apartment overlooked the city like a throne room, filled with artifacts from around the world that he had purchased not for their beauty, but for their price tags. Everything in his life was calculated to demonstrate his superiority over ordinary mortals. The Sterling Grand had become his favorite stage for these performances of power. He held court there regularly, surrounded by investors, politicians, and other members of the global elite who laughed at his jokes, not because they were funny, but because his laughter could make or break fortunes. On the night that would change everything, Kareem felt particularly invincible. The Middle Eastern investment delegation represented billions in potential contracts, and their presence validated his position as a major player on the world stage. He was performing for an audience that understood his cultural references, appreciated his linguistic flair, and shared his assumptions about the natural order of power, which made Layla's response even more devastating. After Layla's public confrontation with Kareem, the Sterling Grand became ground zero for a scandal that spread through elite circles, like wildfire through dry grass. By the next morning, the story had leaked to gossip blogs, financial news sites, and social media platforms, where it exploded into viral status. The headlines wrote themselves. Billionaire humiliated by waitress who speaks his language. Arabic-speaking server exposes oil mogul's cruelty. The waitress who broke a billionaire's pride. Videos taken by other guests' phones spread across Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. The clip of Layla speaking perfect Arabic while maintaining her dignity became a symbol of resistance against wealthy arrogance, shared millions of times with captions in dozens of languages. Kareem's initial reaction was volcanic rage. In the privacy of his penthouse, he hurled a crystal decanter worth more than most people's annual salary against the wall, watching it shatter into 1,000 glittering pieces. A perfect metaphor for his carefully constructed image. She humiliated me, he roared at his assembled team of advisors, publicists, and lawyers. A waitress, in front of investors worth billions. I will destroy her completely. His head of public relations, a nervous woman named Rebecca, who had managed crises for dictators and drug companies, cleared her throat carefully. Sir, perhaps our best strategy is to ignore this incident entirely. Let it fade from public memory. Kareem spun around, his eyes blazing with fury. Ignore? If I ignore her, they will think she was right. They will think a waitress knows more about business than I do. I will crush her until she begs for the privilege of staying silent. But even as he planned his counterattack, something unexpected was happening in the world of high finance. The investors who had witnessed Layla's performance began asking uncomfortable questions. Klaus Ibrahim, the senior investor whose opinion carried enormous weight in Middle Eastern business circles, called an emergency meeting with his partners. Gentlemen, he said, settling his considerable bulk into a leather chair that probably cost more than a car. We need to discuss what happened last night. A publicity stunt. Dismissed another investor. Kareem will handle it. Will he? Klaus asked pointedly. Because I've been thinking about that waitress's Arabic. It wasn't just fluent, it was sophisticated, educated. Her grammar was more precise than Kareem's. Her pronunciation more refined. Silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. What are you suggesting? Someone finally asked. I'm suggesting, Klaus said carefully, that maybe we should verify some of the contract details ourselves, using our own translators, just to be certain. Kareem's retaliation was swift and merciless. Within 48 hours of the incident, his media machine launched a coordinated assault designed to destroy Layla's credibility and character. Anonymous sources fed stories to tabloid newspapers. Waitress makes false claims to impress investors. Uneducated staff member embarrasses herself at Sterling Grand gold digger server stages Arabic stunt for attention. Photos of Layla appeared online. Images taken without her knowledge or consent, showing her in her work uniform, walking to her apartment, even grocery shopping. The invasion of privacy was complete and systematic. Social media accounts, many clearly fake, flooded platforms with attacks on her character, her appearance, her family's poverty, and her presumed motivations. The comments ranged from cruel to threatening. Stay in your lane, waitress. This is what happens when people forget their place. Somebody needs to teach this girl some respect. I know where she works. Maybe it's time for a visit. For the first time in her life, Layla's carefully maintained invisibility was completely shattered. Her name, her face, her story, everything was suddenly public property, dissected and debated by strangers who reduced her to hashtags and hot takes. She sat in her apartment's tiny living room, scrolling through her phone with a mixture of fascination and horror. The attacks hurt, but something else surprised her. The defenders. Mixed in with the cruelty were thousands of supportive comments from people around the world. This woman is a hero for standing up to that arrogant billionaire. Her Arabic was flawless. Respect. We need more people willing to speak truth to power. She said what we all wanted to say. Asterisk messages poured into her social media accounts from Arabic speakers who praised her pronunciation, from service industry workers who thanked her for giving them a voice, from young women who saw her as an inspiration. But the support couldn't completely shield her from the viciousness of the attacks. And Layla found herself crying more in those few days than she had since her mother's death. It was Malik who pulled her back from the edge of despair. Her younger brother, now 15 and wise beyond his years, found her one evening curled up on their second-hand couch, staring blankly at the wall. "Didi," he said, settling beside her with the quiet intensity that made him seem older than his years. "Are you going to let that rich man win?" "It's not about winning or losing," Layla whispered. "It's about surviving. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Maybe I should have kept my head down." "No," Malik said firmly, taking her hands in his. "You spoke the truth. You defended your dignity and the dignity of everyone who works to serve others. If you back down now, you're not just letting him win, you're telling every rich person in the world that they can treat poor people like garbage and will just take it." His words hit her like electricity, straightening her spine and rekindling the fire in her chest. Besides, Malik continued with a grin that reminded her of their father, "I've been reading the comments online. Did you know that people in Morocco are sharing your video? In Egypt, they're calling you the little hero. Students in Syria are using your quote in their essays about respect and dignity." Layla blinked in astonishment. "Really? Really? You didn't just stand up to one arrogant billionaire, Didi. You gave a voice to everyone who has ever been looked down on for being poor, for being different, for being just a server or a driver or a cleaner." That night, For the first time since the incident, Layla slept peacefully. While Karim continued his media blitz against Layla, Klaus Ibrahim and his fellow investors were conducting their own quiet investigation. They hired independent Arabic translators, professors from prestigious universities, native speakers with decades of experience in legal and business translation to review the contracts that Karim had been promoting. What they found was disturbing. Asterisk. The contracts were filled with carefully worded clauses that shifted financial responsibility for environmental damage, worker safety violations, and operational failures away from Karim's parent company and onto smaller subsidiary firms that could be easily dissolved if problems arose. Projected profit margins had been inflated by excluding likely costs and realistic market variables. Investment risks had been minimized through selective presentation of data. Most damaging of all, several clauses contained language that would allow Karim to withdraw from partnerships with minimal penalty while binding his investors to long-term commitments they might never be able to escape. This is not just aggressive business practice, Klaus told his partners during a tense meeting in his private office. This is deception on a massive scale. But how did a waitress spot what our own legal team missed? Asked another investor. Because, Klaus replied grimly. She read the actual Arabic text while we relied on summaries provided by Karim's people. She saw through his game because she understood the language at a deeper level than we gave her credit for. The revelation was devastating. These men had built fortunes on their ability to read markets, assess risks, and spot deception. Yet a woman they had dismissed as invisible had seen through a con that might have cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. We need to meet with her, Klaus decided, quietly, before Karim realizes what we're doing. The call came on a Thursday evening while Lala was helping Malik with his calculus homework. The voice on the phone was formal, but not unkind. Miss Carter, this is Klaus Ibrahim. I was present at the Sterling Grand on the evening of your conversation with Mr. Al-Mosri. I wonder if you might have time to meet with me and several colleagues. We have some documents we'd like you to review. Lala's heart raced. Klaus Ibrahim was one of the most powerful investors in the Middle East. A man whose decisions could topple governments and reshape economies. What could he possibly want with her? Sky. I'm not sure I understand, she managed to say. We would like to verify some Arabic translations. Klaus explained carefully. Your performance the other night was quite impressive. We believe you might be able to help us with some business documents. The meeting was arranged for the next evening at a discreet office building downtown, far from the glittering world of the Sterling Grand, where gossip flowed like expensive wine. When Layla arrived, she found herself facing 6 of the most powerful men she had ever seen, investors whose combined wealth could buy small countries, whose decisions appeared in headlines around the world. Yet they looked at her not with condescension, but with something she had rarely experienced. From wealthy people, respect. Klaus gestured to a chair at the conference table. Miss Carter, please sit. We have some questions about contract language. and we believe you're uniquely qualified to help us understand what we're really being asked to sign. For the next 3 hours, Layla read through dozens of contract clauses, translating not just the literal meaning of the Arabic text, but explaining the cultural and legal implications that native speakers would understand instinctively with each translation. The investors' expressions grew darker. They were seeing, perhaps for the first time, how Karim had been using their linguistic limitations against them. "This clause here," Layla explained, pointing to a section buried deep in a 200-page agreement, "says that environmental restoration costs will be paid by the responsible subsidiary entity. But in Arabic legal terminology, this means Karim's main company isn't liable only, whatever shell company he creates, for this specific project. And if that subsidiary goes bankrupt," asked one investor, "then you're responsible for cleanup costs." But Karim isn't. Silence filled the room as the implications sank in. "Miss Carter," Klaus said finally, "you may have just saved us from losing everything." When Karim learned about the investor's secret meeting with Layla, his rage reached nuclear levels. He summoned emergency meetings with his legal team, his PR specialists, and his security consultants. "They went behind my back," he seethed, pacing his office like a caged predator. "They conspired with a waitress against me." His head lawyer, a man who had spent decades helping wealthy clients avoid consequences, spoke carefully. "Sir, our legal position is challenging. If the investors can prove that contract translations were misleading, the translations were perfectly accurate." Karim snapped. "Technically accurate, perhaps. But if they can demonstrate intent to deceive through selective presentation or cultural context manipulation," Karim's face went white as he realized the implications. A lawsuit from investors of this caliber could destroy not just his current deals, but his entire reputation. No one in the international business community would trust him again. "Then we destroy her credibility completely," he said with cold calculation. "If she's discredited, her translations become worthless." But it was too late for damage control. The story had already grown beyond his ability to manage. International news outlets picked up the tale. Waitress exposes Billionaire's contract deception. Financial publications ran detailed analyses of Karim's business practices. Regulatory authorities in 3 countries opened investigations into his corporate structures. Most damaging of all, other investors, people not involved in the original incident, began asking for independent reviews of their own contracts with Karim's companies. The ripple effects spread through the global business community like cracks in a dam. Desperate to regain control of the narrative, Karim made a fatal miscalculation. He decided to sue Layla for defamation, claiming that her inaccurate translations had damaged his business relationships and cost him hundreds of millions in lost deals. The lawsuit made international headlines and turned Layla into a global symbol of resistance against corporate power. Legal observers noted the unprecedented nature of a billionaire taking a waitress to court over linguistic disagreements. Lala couldn't afford the kind of high-powered legal team that Karim assembled, but she didn't need to. Within days of the lawsuit being filed, she was contacted by the American Civil Liberties Union the Center for Constitutional Rights, and several other organizations that offered to represent her pro bono. More surprisingly, Klaus Ibrahim and his investor group quietly funded her defense, hiring some of the world's best corporate litigation specialists. To ensure she had every possible advantage, the trial became a media circus. Every day brought new revelations about Karim's business practices, testimonies from Arabic scholars who confirmed the accuracy of Layla's translations, and character witnesses who spoke about her integrity and dedication to education. The most powerful moment came when Layla took the stand in her own defense. Wearing a simple but dignified navy blue dress, she faced down Karim's aggressive legal team with quiet courage. "Miss Carter," Karim's lead attorney asked with barely concealed condescension, "what qualifies you, a waitress with no formal education, to challenge the business practices of a Harvard MBA?" Layla looked directly at the jury, her voice steady and clear. "I qualify because I spent 12 years learning not just to speak Arabic, but to understand its nuances, its cultural context, its legal implications. I qualify because I read every word of those contracts carefully, without the assumption that my wealth or position made me automatically right. And I qualify because telling the truth doesn't require a diploma, it requires courage." The courtroom erupted in applause that the judge couldn't entirely suppress. The trial lasted 3 weeks and ended with a verdict that stunned the international business community. Not only did the jury find in favor of Layla, but they also ruled that Karim's contracts had indeed contained deliberately misleading language, designed to deceive non-Arabic speaking investors. The financial penalties were severe. Karim was ordered to pay damages not just to Layla, but to the investors, who had been misled by his contracts. Regulatory authorities imposed additional fines that ran into the hundreds of millions. But the real damage was to Karim's reputation. The man who had built an empire on the assumption that his wealth made him untouchable found himself toxic in international business circles. Partners withdrew from deals, banks reconsidered credit lines, and his carefully constructed image crumbled like a house built on sand. For Layla, victory brought unexpected opportunities. Universities offered her full scholarships to complete the linguistics degree she had deferred years earlier. Publishers approached her about writing a book. Speaking bureaus wanted to book her for conferences round the world. But the offer that meant the most came from Klaus Ibrahim himself. Miss Carter, he said during a private meeting after the trial, "My investment group is expanding into new markets, where cultural understanding is crucial to success. We need someone who can help us navigate not just language barriers, but cultural contexts we might miss. The position would pay more than enough to support your family and fund your education. Are you interested?" For the first time in her adult life, Layla had choices. Real choices. The kind of choices she had dreamed about during those late nights studying by lamplight. 6 months after the trial, Layla Carter walked across the stage at the State University to receive her bachelor's degree in Arabic Studies and international business, a degree she completed through a combination of credit for her demonstrated expertise, accelerated coursework, and the kind of focused determination that had defined her entire life. In the audience, her father David wiped tears from his eyes while Malik cheered loud enough to embarrass her. Mrs. Nura, now in her 80s but still sharp as a blade, sat in the front row beaming with the pride of a teacher whose student had exceeded every expectation. "You did it, baby girl," David whispered when she found them after the ceremony. "You really did it." "We did it, Baba," Lala corrected, hugging him tight. "All of us together." Her new position with Klaus Ibrahim's investment firm had transformed not just her life, but her family's entire future. Malik was now enrolled in a prestigious private school, where his mathematical genius was finally being properly nurtured. David had been able to reduce his taxi driving hours and was taking business courses himself, dreaming of opening his own small transportation company. They had moved out of the apartment above the laundromat into a modest but comfortable house with a yard, where Layla could finally have the library she had always dreamed of. The walls were lined with books in Arabic, English, French, and Mandarin. She had discovered a talent for languages that extended far beyond her first love. Asterisk. The story of the waitress who spoke truth to power had inspired changes far beyond Layla's personal transformation. The Sterling Grand had implemented new policies requiring cultural sensitivity training for all staff and management, recognizing that dignity and respect should flow in all directions. Regardless of economic status, other luxury establishments followed suit, afraid of becoming the next viral example of elite arrogance. Service industry workers round the world found their voices strengthened by Layla's example, leading to improved working conditions and protection from verbal abuse by wealthy patrons. It's about the power of authentic expertise over credentialed ignorance. You knew more about Arabic business language than a billionaire who was supposedly fluent. You understood cultural nuances that his Harvard MBA never taught him. Your story proves that real knowledge comes from curiosity and dedication, not from expensive degrees. Their courtship was conducted in 3 languages: English for everyday conversation, Arabic for poetry and deeper philosophical discussions, and Spanish, which they were learning together as a shared adventure. When Ahmad proposed, he did so in the form of a classical Arabic poem that he had written himself, presenting it to her during a quiet evening in her library. The poem compared her to the legendary female scholars of medieval Cordoba, women who had preserved and transmitted knowledge across cultural boundaries. "I love you not just for who you are," he told her as she cried over the beautiful verses, "but for who you inspire others to become." Lala and Ahmad's wedding was a celebration of everything they believed in: cultural diversity, educational opportunity, and the dignity of work. The ceremony was conducted in Arabic and English, with readings in Spanish, Urdu, and French representing the languages of their extended community. The guest list read like a United Nations meeting crossed with a labor convention: former waitresses and current ambassadors, dishwashers and diplomats, janitors and judges. Klaus Ibrahim gave one of the toasts, praising Layla's courage to speak truth in any language. Mrs. Nura, now in her 80s but still sharp, recited a blessing in classical Arabic that brought tears to everyone's eyes. But the most moving moment came when Malik, now a senior in high school and headed to MIT on a full scholarship, stood to address the gathering. My sister taught me that education isn't about proving you're better than other people, it's about becoming better equipped to serve other people. She could have used her fame for personal gain, but instead she built bridges. She could have left our community behind, but instead she brought our community with her. That's not just success, that's leadership. The newlyweds honeymooned in Jordan, where Ahmad's relatives welcomed Layla as family, and where she had the profound experience of using her Arabic skills in their natural Middle Eastern context, walking through the souks of Amman, conversing easily with shopkeepers and taxi drivers. She felt the full circle of her linguistic journey. "You speak like you were born here," one elderly merchant told her in Arabic. "But your accent has something different, something that shows you learned our language with love, not just necessity." Upon returning from their honeymoon, Layla and Ahmad established the Dignity Institute, an expanded version of her foundation that combined language education with economic empowerment and cultural understanding. The Institute's programs now operated in 15 cities and had helped thousands of working adults develop new skills and career opportunities. They also began collaborating on a book about the intersection of language, culture, and economic justice. Words of Worth: How Language Shapes Economic Opportunity became a bestseller and required reading in business schools around the world. But their most important project was deeply personal. When Layla became pregnant with their first child, she and Ahmad spent long evenings discussing how to raise a child who would understand privilege and responsibility in equal measure. "Our daughter will grow up with advantages we never had," Ahmad reflected one evening as they prepared the nursery. "How do we ensure she uses those advantages to lift others up rather than to look down on them?" "We teach her that every gift comes with the responsibility to share it," Layla replied, her hands resting on her growing belly. "And we make sure she understands that respect and dignity are not luxuries. They're necessities for building a world worth living in." They decided to name their daughter Amira, which means princess in Arabic. But they planned to teach her that true royalty comes from service to others, not from being served by others. 5 years after the incident that changed her life, Lala Carter Hassan had become an internationally recognized advocate for workers' rights and cross-cultural understanding. But she never forgot that her story began with a single moment of courage, the decision to speak truth to power when silence would have been safer. The sterling grand had been transformed into a model of workplace dignity, with fair wages, cultural competency training, and promotion opportunities for all employees. The restaurant now offered its staff language learning programs and professional development courses, recognizing that investing in workers' growth was good for both business and humanity. Kareem al-Mosri, meanwhile, had been convicted of fraud and was serving a lengthy prison sentence. His business empire had been dismantled, with settlement funds creating scholarships and worker protection programs around the world. In a bitter irony, the man who had built his fortune on the exploitation of others now found himself performing menial labor in the prison kitchen. finally understanding what it felt like to be treated as invisible. The ripple effects of Layla's courage continued to spread. Other workers found the strength to report abuse and demand dignity. Business leaders began recognizing that cultural competency and language skills among their employees were assets to be celebrated rather than differences to be erased. Universities established programs studying the Carter effect, the phenomenon of how a single act of authentic courage could catalyze systemic change. Social movements adopted her phrase "dignity is not negotiable" as a rallying cry for economic justice. On a crisp autumn evening, Lala sat in her home library, surrounded by books in a dozen languages, preparing for a lecture she would deliver at Harvard Business School. The irony was not lost on her. She would be teaching future executives about cross-cultural communication and ethical leadership at the very institution that had educated Kareem al-Masri. Malik, now a successful engineer working on sustainable energy projects, stopped by for their weekly dinner. At 21, he had grown into a man of quiet confidence and deep compassion, shaped by watching his sister transform challenge into opportunity. "Didi," he said, using the childhood nickname he had never outgrown, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that night? If you had just stayed quiet and invisible?" Layla looked up from her notes, considering the question that had haunted her own thoughts many times. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "Part of me wonders if I would have found another way to use my education, another path to make a difference. But honestly, Malik, I don't think I had a choice." When I heard those words, when I saw that cruel smile, staying silent would have killed something inside me. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is the thing that looks safest. Little Amira, now 2 years old, toddled into the room carrying a picture book, babbling happily in the mixture of Arabic, English, and baby talk that had become the soundtrack of the Hassan household. She climbed onto her mother's lap, and Layla automatically began reading to her in Arabic, the same musical language that had once made a 12-year-old girl in a taxicab dream of understanding the world. "The most important thing," Layla continued, kissing the top of her daughter's head, "is that our story doesn't end with me. It continues with her, with you, with everyone who chooses courage over comfort." The Harvard lecture hall was packed beyond capacity, with students, faculty, and business leaders crowding every available space. Lala took the podium wearing a simple blue dress that echoed the one she had worn during the trial. Her presence calm but commanding. "5 years ago," she began, "I was invisible in a room not unlike this one. Not because I wasn't present, but because people chose not to see me. Today, I want to talk about the difference between being heard and being listened to, between speaking and being understood, between having power and using it wisely." She told her story not as a fairy tale of triumph, but as a case study in the intersection of language, culture, and economic justice. She analyzed the linguistic techniques Kareem had used to obscure meaning in contracts, the cultural assumptions that had made his deception possible, and the systemic changes needed to prevent similar exploitation. But the most powerful moment came when she deviated from her prepared remarks to address the future business leaders in the audience directly. Some of you will graduate from this institution and acquire tremendous power, the power to hire and fire, to invest and divest, to shape policies that affect millions of people. That power will come with a choice that you will face every single day. Will you use your advantages to lift others up or to keep them down? She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some skeptical, some inspired, all listening intently. I was a waitress who spoke Arabic. That combination of supposedly humble circumstances and hidden knowledge changed everything. But here's the secret. Everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't, has experienced something you haven't, carries wisdom you need. Your job as leaders is not to demonstrate your superiority, it's to discover the extraordinary in what others dismiss as ordinary. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes, but more importantly, her words sparked conversations that continued in dormitories, ballrooms, and coffee shops around the world. Years of working with the Dignity Institute had taught Layla that her story was not unique. In its broad outlines, across the world, people from marginalized communities possessed knowledge, skills, and insights that the dominant culture routinely overlooked or undervalued. She met a Mexican janitor who earned engineering degrees from his home country, but couldn't get them recognized in the United States. So he spent his days cleaning offices in buildings he was qualified to design. She encountered a Somali refugee who spoke 6 languages fluently, but was considered uneducated. Because her schooling had been disrupted by war, she worked with a Filipino domestic worker who had been a successful businesswoman before immigration. Laws forced her into household service. Each of these stories reinforced her belief that dignity was not just about individual respect, it was about recognizing and utilizing the full potential of human resources that society was systematically wasting. The Dignity Institute began documenting these stories, creating a database of hidden expertise that connected skilled workers with opportunities that matched their abilities. The program, called Beyond the Resume, helped thousands of immigrants and working-class Americans find career paths that utilized their full range of talents. Every language is a doorway, Layla often told her audiences. Every culture is a library. Every worker carries knowledge that could transform your business, if you're wise enough to recognize it. As her reputation grew, Layla was increasingly invited to work with corporations, government agencies, and educational institutions that wanted to avoid their own sterling grand moments, public relations disasters caused by cultural insensitivity and worker mistreatment. She developed a training program called the Language of Respect that taught managers and executives how to recognize and value the linguistic and cultural assets their employees brought to the workplace. The program was mandatory at many Fortune 500 companies and had become a standard part of international business education. But her most rewarding work was with young people, high school and college students who reminded her of herself at their age, full of dreams but uncertain about paths forward. She established mentorship programs that paired promising young people with successful professionals who had overcome similar obstacles. "The most important thing I can teach you," she told a group of high school students from working-class families, is that your background is not a limitation, it's a perspective. You see things that people who grew up with advantages cannot see. You understand struggles they cannot understand. That knowledge is valuable, but only if you develop the skills to articulate it effectively. One student, a young Latina whose parents worked in restaurant kitchens, raised her hand. But Miss Layla, what if we're not good enough? What if we don't have what it takes to succeed in their world? Lala's voice was gentle, but firm. Mija, you don't need to succeed in their world. You need to succeed in the world, the real world, where people like your parents work hard every day to build something better for their children. Your job is not to become them, it's to become the best version of yourself. 10 years after a waitress spoke perfect Arabic to an arrogant billionaire, the world had not been completely transformed. Poverty still existed. Inequalities still persisted. Workers still faced discrimination and disrespect. But something fundamental had shifted in the global conversation about dignity, respect, and the value of human knowledge in all its forms. The Carter effect had become a recognized phenomenon in business schools and social science research. The idea that authentic expertise and moral courage could create disproportionate positive change even when wielded by people with minimal traditional power. Layla Carter Hassan, now a professor at Georgetown University alongside her husband, continued to teach, write, and advocate for workers' rights and cross-cultural understanding. But she never forgot that her story began with a single moment of choice, the decision to speak truth. When silence would have been safer, on quiet evenings, sitting in her library while Ahmad graded papers and little Amira played with blocks that had letters from different alphabets, Lala would sometimes pull out her old Arabic textbooks, the worn, dog-eared volumes that had been her companions through years of study. By lamplight in a cramped apartment, the pages were yellow now, the covers held together with tape, but the words inside remained as powerful as ever. Those books had been her bridge between worlds, her tools for transformation, her weapons against ignorance and prejudice. Baba was right, she would whisper to herself, remembering her father's long-ago words about education being a skeleton key. But David Carter had understood only part of the truth. Education wasn't just about unlocking doors, it was about building doors where none had existed before. Every person who learned to see dignity in unexpected places, every manager who discovered hidden talents in their workforce, every young person who found the courage to speak their truth, they were all part of the same story that had begun with a taxi driver's daughter who fell in love with the music of Arabic and refused to let wealth silence her voice. The waitress had spoken. The world had listened, and in listening, it had learned that respect, like truth, recognizes no hierarchy. The most powerful empires are not built with oil and gold, but with words and courage, and the unshakable belief that every human being deserves dignity. And sometimes it takes just one voice, clear, confident, and unafraid, to remind the world of that truth. Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Dignity is not measured by wealth, but by how you treat others. Asterisk.